You're welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Kibi. On Friday, June 30th, was an annual celebration of International Day of Parliamentarism, commemorating the founding of the Inter-Parliamentary Union in 1889. The celebration was an opportunity to reflect on the progress made by parliaments worldwide in achieving its goals. Now, this year, the United Nations designated the theme as Parliaments for the Planet. The theme emphasized the urgent need for climate action and urged parliaments and parliamentarians to promote the reduction of carbon footprints and adopt greener policies. A coalition of legislative advocacy groups in Nigeria held a press conference to mark the day. On Friday, June 30th, the world marked the annual celebration of the International Day of Parliamentarism, commemorating the founding of the Inter-Parliamentary Union (IPU) in 1889. The theme for this year's celebration is Parliaments for the Planet. The theme emphasizes that climate action starts at home, urging parliaments and parliamentarians to promote the reduction of carbon footprints and adopt greener policies. In Nigeria, the African Parliamentary Advocacy and Reform Group and the Parliamentarians for Global Action are calling for the 10th National Assembly to adopt the digital parliament system in line with global best practices. This, according to them, will improve the involvement and contribution of lawmakers to every legislation.
There are issues that laws are passed without even the key clauses of them or even the entire legislation being circulated to all the members and senators as required by the standing orders and the Constitution. And digital technology is one of the ways you can easily circulate these proposed legislation so that every member can look at it clause by clause and able to, make a robust contribution in the floor. So if you're a leader, then one of the key virtues of a leader is teachability, being able to be trained. And I don't think that technology and the backgrounds of people can stop them from taking advantage of technology. And like I mentioned, I think NILS is well placed and positioned, and even other sister organizations led by NILS to be able to provide the kind of training. Look at the issue of even report, sectional report, annual reports of committees. Look at the issue of duplication of bills, the repetition of motions. Now, imagine a situation where you are not documenting properly and you are not using technology, especially for the Committee on Rules and Business and the entire National Assembly to, synchronize legislative processes. What you find is that people can bring bills that have already been passed and come and waste legislative manpower, time and resources, again. And so this technology is the way to go.
Speaking of lawmaking, a public analyst, Idayat Hassan, is setting the agenda for the 10th Assembly ahead of its resumption on Tuesday, July 4th. She wants the National Assembly to pay attention while putting together its legislative agenda.
The priority should be oversight, oversight, oversight. And at this point, oversight has become extremely important because Nigerians are making a lot of sacrifices. If you look at the removal of fuel subsidy, it means that fuel is costing more. Food, not just transportation, have increased up to 100% or more than at least transportation, more than 100% in some instances. We do not want to see just the oversight of inviting ministers, inviting head of agencies on ground, or hearing about graft. Nigeria is at a critical juncture where we can either make it or we can mar it.
She also highlights some legislations which she expects the National Assembly to enact immediately.
I want a review of the Electoral Act, for instance, will be very, very important, learning from the last elections. What are the new things that we want to be added to the Electoral Act? And when you talk in terms of elections, the Electoral Offences Commission the bill was pending in the last assembly. It should be one of the first bills we expect the 10th National Assembly to revisit itself. Like, this is important because we are talking about curbing impunity. And electoral impunity, electoral corruption has a way of helping to increase the whole corruption that we actually see here. We are also looking in terms of even the revisiting of the the student loan. As good as the bill as a way forward, it is actually a positive development, but there are still lots of provisions in this act that has got to be revisited.
With the election of the major principal officers of a National Assembly, the politics of who gets what is almost over, and it's time for the 10th Assembly to get to work immediately. The Senate and House of Representatives are on a 2-week recess to resume on July 4th. Now, the 10th Assembly is inheriting a nation with economic challenges ranging from revenue shortfalls, a huge budget deficit and debt burden, as well as high unemployment rates. Nigerians are looking to federal lawmakers to provide legislative intervention to these challenges, as well as cushioning the effect of the removal of petroleum subsidy. Now, a legislative analyst, Mr. Ernest Dereke, spoke to me on the kinds of legislative interventions he would like to see from parliaments as quickly as possible.
One of the first things I think the National Assembly should do is to first reassert, the independence of the legislature. Nigerians have this perception, particularly with the 9th Assembly, that it was a mere rubber stamp. It was a famous appellation used to describe, the 9th Assembly. And so I feel that coming on board, the 10th National Assembly should, as a matter of priority, reassert itself as an independent arm of government, as a very important arm of government, which really makes democracy what it is. And so I believe that the National Assembly now, the 10th Assembly, should, as much as possible, reassure Nigerians that this is not going to be another rubber stamp assembly. Now, why I say it is going to be difficult is given the manner in which the principal officers emerged, the manner in which the principal officers emerged. Stories had it that the executive, had a hand in the emergence of the presiding officers of the two chambers of the 10th Assembly. Now, it was the same thing we saw in the 9th Assembly. And so it will be very difficult, but it is very, very necessary that the Assembly, rescues itself, from that toga of being a rubber stamp, so that Nigerians can have confidence in the Assembly.
And how can the Assembly do this?
Exactly. Now, one is not saying that the Assembly should be confrontational, but the Assembly should realize that this is an independent arm of government in accordance with the principles of separation of powers, so as to ensure that the Assembly is able to check and hold the executive to account for its actions and as well as its inactions. Now, it is not for the Assembly to confront the executive. It is not for the Assembly to frustrate the executive. Now, it is for the Assembly, yes, while collaborating, while cooperating, as the Senate President said, that while they will cooperate with the executive, they will also ensure that they hold the executive to account for its action, particularly in the area of oversight. Now, you can accuse the National Assembly over the years of any other thing, but you can't accuse it of having taken seriously that responsibility of oversight. And that is why most times we hear of investigative hearings, we hear of investigations, in the National Assembly, and at the end of the day, nothing comes out of it. Up till now, we haven't heard anything about the NDDC, investigation carried out by the two chambers of the National Assembly, of the Ninth National Assembly. And so if they become very serious about the oversight responsibilities which the Constitution requires them, to carry out, then it is one way. Now, but in going about the oversight, it shouldn't be the usual thing of going there maybe to curry favors from the executive. It should be done in the sense and manner of, taking government back to the people, making sure that the executive is responsible to the people who have elected it.
Now, one of the things that would happen in the National Assembly, particularly in the Senate, in the next few, hopefully, weeks, is the president will send the names of ministerial nominees to the Senate for confirmation. And the process will entail a screening of these nominees individually by the Senate. We've seen this happen over the years since 1999. And then one of the things people have asked, is why is the president the president actually not attaching the portfolios of the ministers before sending it to the National Assembly? What is the implication of this refusal or persistent in the refusal to attach portfolios to the ministerial list sent to the National Assembly?
Well, it simply means that we revert to the status quo, to what we already know, which is the president sends nominees without, specifying what portfolios, what ministries each person on the list would, take care of. And what it also means, again, is that it will be the usual questions that they will ask, talk about yourself, what can you contribute to the economy, to the government, and so on and so forth. There won't be, the senators won't really be specific in terms of trying to find out whether those individuals who will make it, really have the capacity to discharge in the areas that they will be assigned to, to man. And it means that it will just be general issues, ask the usual questions, and then take a bow and go. So there won't be, we can't have specific questions directed to each of the nominees, with regards to the ministries that they will eventually be assigned to. Nigerians had hoped that the former president would have signed, that constitutional amendment which requires that the president should attach the portfolios, so that when senators are screening, they will be screening and asking questions that are relevant, to the ministries that they have been assigned.
But nothing stops the president, even irrespective of the fact that the Constitution hasn't been amended to include that clause, to actually even still send the portfolios to accompany the ministers.
Yes, no law stops the president from doing so, and it will be a very good one if he does so. And more so that the president has shown signs that he wants to hit the ground. He has hit the ground running, of course. And then he has also shown a different approach to leadership and governance. And so it will also be an opportunity for us to say, Mr. President, why don't you act differently from your predecessors? Can you attach the portfolios so that these senators can be guided in terms of the questions that they will be asking each individual? And it also helps the president to really find out, beyond what he already knows about the nominees, whether the nominees, will actually, whether they have the capacity, to manage the ministries that he would have, assigned to them. Because performance at the National Assembly could also, help him to maybe strengthen his decision on a particular individual. Or he can decide to say, okay, having listened or having seen your performance at the National Assembly, I'm deciding to reassign you to a different ministry.
You're welcome back to the Gavel. We continue with the interview with Mr. Ernest Ereke on his expectations from the 10th Assembly. But regardless of if the president attaches the portfolios, how should the National Assembly handle, that's the Senate in particular, handle the screening of these nominees to ensure that we have the best, of the crop?
Exactly. So the Senate shouldn't just be partisan, as we have seen. It shouldn't just be a party affair where one party, the majority party, will want to show that we have the controlling numbers here. Then secondly is that they mustn't ignore petitions that will come from citizens. Those petitions should be looked at very well to find out whether there are merits to those petitions or not. So those petitions shouldn't be thrown away in the usual manner of partisanship. And then thirdly is to say that they should just do this with national interest in mind instead of what they will get from those individual ministers. You will recall that over the years, the Senate has always been accused of wanting to get one favor or the other from nominees. You will recall that some nominees in the past had mentioned that some senators wanted, to get some favors from them in exchange for the screening. And so I expect that this should be a different Senate. Of course, the Senate president said that this will be an uncommon 10th Senate. And so we expect them to be that uncommon. We expect them not to curry favors from those nominees. We expect them to not to be overly partisan in terms of the screening. And we expect that it should be more serious than what we have seen in the past.
And so you do not want to see the scenario where we have the bow and go,
take a bow
regardless of
whether
if
you were a former senator or a member of the assembly. Everybody on that list should be scrutinized, should be questioned, because we are going to be assigning responsibilities where Nigerians' lives are dependent on. And so whether you were a senator or not, I expect that the Senate should be that uncommon by asking everybody who will make the list the very, very tough questions.
With, we having the 10th Assembly having more political parties, maybe a stronger opposition, or more opposition parties there, do you think there'll be a difference, in the way this screening exercise will be done, and even in what you said earlier about the 10th Assembly asserting its independence? Do you see a change?
Well, unfortunately and sadly, just like you rightly said, given the number of opposition political parties we have in the 10th Assembly, one would have expected an assembly that will have a stronger opposition, a very critical opposition. But when you look at the emergence and the politics around, the principal positions in the 10th Assembly, you will discover that sadly, we may not have that kind of critical opposition in the 10th Assembly. I mean, all of us saw, what played out in the elections of the principal officers. And while it wasn't what we thought we would see. We thought we would have an opposition that would really have, held out its own and gone further to assert itself with the emergence of the principal officers. But we saw how they all followed one path.
It was even interesting to even see that we saw the opposition was even from the ruling party.
Exactly. And we also saw, even though it is good for harmony in the House, we saw that, some opposition members were campaign coordinators, spokespersons for some of the aspirants. But yes, it is good for the harmony, but in terms of delivering, in terms of being a critical assembly, I don't think we'll have that very strong opposition. We hope that will change with time, but given what we have seen in the early days, I'm not expecting those political parties to be that critical.
And this is rather unfortunate what you're saying, because that was one of the problems people had pointed out in the 9th Assembly, that the opposition in the 9th Assembly, they disappeared. We didn't see much of the opposition in the 9th Assembly.
Yes, especially because maybe when we begin to look at, okay, why is it that the opposition political parties get swallowed by the majority party? Now, of course, there are committees, to be appointed by the principal officers, and these members, want to get the so-called juicy committees, as we know. And so they would want to, pander to the dictates of the principal officers, who, of course, are from the majority political parties.
Back to legislative business after the whole, drama of the elections, the National Assembly election, who gets what, and all. Legislative business would, start in earnest. What are you expecting to see from the 10th Assembly? First of all, in terms of legislations, in terms of amendment of ongoing legislations, what specific areas do you want to see the National Assembly legislate on immediately? Okay,
first is to quickly say that the president, or let's say the executive, has hit the ground running. And it appears that the president is in a haste to make a lot of changes. And I'm foreseeing that the executive will embark on reforms, so many reforms. But I also believe that some of these reforms will require legislative actions. And so the president seems to be moving on a very fast lane. And I would expect the 10th Assembly to be able to match the energy and pace at which the president is also moving. And so since Nigerians want to see results, and there will be reforms, I envisage that there will be reforms, I expect that the National Assembly should be thorough in terms of legislative actions that will back up some of the reforms that the executive, will initiate. Now, I also expect that the 10th Assembly, of course, we know that every assembly will embark upon constitutional amendments. Now, there are still some constitutional issues that need to be addressed. One is that we should continue the piecemeal approach that the 9th Assembly introduced in the area of restructuring and shedding the load which the center is carrying. And so I expect that the 10th Assembly should continue in that direction, and then reintroduce some of those bills that the former president didn't sign. I also expect that the 10th National Assembly should prioritize the financial independence and autonomy of local government areas in Nigeria, so that we can begin to build democracy from the very low levels, so that we strengthen that tier of government in order to improve rural development. And so I expect that the local government reforms again should feature prominently in what the 10th Assembly should be doing. I also expect that the 10th Assembly should initiate bills and take legislative actions that will help, revitalize and rebuild the Nigerian economy. A lot, of course, the executive has taken, so many, some steps that have become, that a lot of us are, complaining about, and people are already beginning to feel the impact of some of the reforms of the executive. So I expect that the 10th Assembly should take legislative actions that can cushion the effects of some of these reforms. I equally expect that they should be more thorough and more demanding on the executive when certain economic decisions are made. For instance, the idea of continuous borrowing without really interrogating what these loans are for. And so I expect that the 10th Assembly should be that reformist-minded. I also expect that in the area of security, that the 10th Assembly should do more in order to secure lives and property in this country.
This is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us, and see you again next week.